Jerry Lewis Telethon. We're making about 100 phone calls a day to different military units and coordinating everything for that in May. So just want to, there's two significant events that we're going to honor tonight. The first one occurred 50 years ago this month, and that was a tragedy, and that was when the T-38 that Elliot C. and Charles Bassett were flying in, coming in from Houston, Texas, to inspect their Gemini IX spacecraft that was being built at McDonnell Aircraft, crashed at Lambert Field. And so I'll let take me the next thing is the 100th anniversary of Boeing. Everybody's talking over here at the table. It's also, I'm retired Coast Guard. It's the 100th anniversary of Coast Guard Aviation. Is that an H-60? Rich? We had 3 airplanes so far: a Dolphin, a CN-285, and an H-60. Okay. The centennial paint scheme. Yeah, just different era markings. Rich Dan here was responsible for the Navy centennial paint schemes, what was it, 5 years ago? Can you believe that? Yeah, I don't know where time goes. So lots of cool stuff. But our guest speaker tonight is Paul Segura. And Paul works over at Boeing. He is the program lifecycle management engineering manager, and been out there, what, 29 years. So Dad was with Boeing, was instrumental in the early 727 program up in Washington State. So Paul has kindly prepared for us an overview of 100 years of Boeing and its legacy company. So we're going to talk about Bill Boeing, started it all. Talk about Dutch Kinderberger with North American Aviation, Donald Douglas, and obviously James McDonnell. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul and let you take point. Paul, welcome.
I'm going to go ahead and use this. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Please do.
Yes.
All right. We'll go ahead and do it. So thank you, Dan, and thank you for the invitation to speak tonight. I have to give the credit to Dr. Henry Brownlee, who is our actual historian for the defense side of the Boeing company. This is actually his brief and his talk. But you got me tonight. So as Dan mentioned, I am an engineering manager at Boeing, but I'm also a member of the Boeing Enterprise Historical Council. And we do have one other member of our historical council, Rich Dan. I think several of you may know Rich. And I'm also a member of the St. Louis side Boeing Historical Council. We have at least 2 members. You guys can raise your hands. Bruce Scheidhauer and Ron Jones. Are there any other historical council members here? No? Okay. So tonight, in my role as a member of the Historical Council, I'm going to give you just a very brief, very high-level history of the Boeing company. What we brought here tonight, copies of our book called A Brief History of the Boeing Company. And kind of a wild guess from previous meetings, I brought 60 books, but 60 books may not be enough for tonight. But that's okay. I told Dan that if we run out, we'll go ahead and provide some more, and then I can give them to Dan, and maybe at the next meeting can have those available as well. So in 1916 is when the Boeing company first started. Hence, that's why we're celebrating our 100th anniversary this year. I am going to get to the Gemini piece here. That's toward the end of, or at the end of our presentation tonight. And we go to the next chart. So these are just kind of some quotes to kind of frame us this evening. The first one says, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." That may be a familiar quote. You may have heard it before. It's from George Santayana, who's a early 20th century historian. If you have been to the United States, the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, that quote is right at the entrance, prominently displayed. Right. So, why is the Boeing company interested this quote kind of captures a piece of that decline. The second one comes from the novel 1984, written by George Orwell. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So when it comes to any kind of history, whether it's corporate history from a Boeing perspective, or it's national history, and it's your own family history, right? It's those in the present, and the responsibility of those in the present to capture that history. Whatever is not captured by those in the present does not go forward into the future. Okay, so those of us here on the Historical Council working with Dr. Brownlee take that responsibility very seriously in order to capture as much as we can of the past now, the present, going forward into the future. All of you here, to me, is speaking the same kind of thing. If you're interested in history, if you have a passion for that history, get that story told. Dennis Muhlenberg, who is our President and Chief Executive Officer, said this last year. In the past century, humankind has gone from walking on Earth to walking on the moon, from riding horses to flying airplanes and spaceships, and Boeing has been there every step of the way. We weren't involved in everything, okay, but we were involved every step of the way. We can go to the next slide. So this is just kind of a brief glimpse of some kind of monumental key things that happened in our history. Going along the top, you see in 1916 the B&W, which was Bill Boeing's first airplane up in Seattle. In 1920, Donald Douglas built the Cloudster. In 1934, North American built the NA-16. In 1939, the XB-67. Going now on the lower part of the slide here, the Red Barn, which is the original building that Boeing used, the original building of the Boeing Company in 1916. 1924, a major event happened with the Douglas World Cruisers, that group of airplanes making a flight around the world, setting a record at the time. 1967, in the midst of the space race, the Apollo program, to land a man on the moon, the Apollo Saturn V was designed and built by heritage Boeing companies. I think something here that we may be very familiar with. In 1979, the 5,000th F-4 Phantom was delivered by McDonnell Aircraft. Major milestone. So here's our four founders, and Dr. Brownlee kind of has kind of a warm feeling for these guys. I mean, obviously these guys aren't alive anymore, okay? But you know, in his job, I kind of envy him a little bit, because in his job, he's close to them from the perspective that he's always in their stories, okay? And we'll get to this part later, but there's artifacts that we have of these gentlemen, and each one of them, although very different from each other, have some common threads, in that the world of aviation and aerospace today is obviously very large. It's global. These guys were at the very beginning of it, at a time when it was something very, very new, and that takes a certain kind of personality, a certain kind of spirit, right? So we're going to be talking about these four gentlemen this evening. As we have here, they're rare, historically significant people, and we selected the original logos from the heritage companies at that time, kind of see what those look like. So Bill Boeing, Donald Douglas, Dutch Kindleberger, and James S. McDonnell. So this is William Boeing. I like to call him Bill Boeing. This quote here says, "We are embarked as pioneers upon a new science and industry, which our problems are so new and unusual that it behooves no one to dismiss any novel idea with the statement that it can't be done. It can't be done. Our job is to keep everlastingly at research and experiment to let no new improvement in flying equipment pass us by. Bill Boeing's father was in the timber business in the Pacific Northwest, and Bill inherited that business from his father. It was a very well-run business when he received it, and he had, as a result, a lot of resources already at his disposal. He didn't have to go on to anything else. Okay, but Bill Boeing could have spent the rest of his life in the timber business and would have been very successful. At least I think so. But there was something about aviation, which was very new at that time, right, in 1916, that kind of bit his bug at that particular point. And he knew that he somehow had to get into that particular world. And as a result of that, he took a risk. He took a risk. We think about some of the entrepreneurial activity that's going on today, technologies that are brand new today. You have to think about the people who decide to get into those technologies today, the types of people those are. Bill was one of those types. So, Bill Boeing's, amongst his first experiences with aviation, had to do with Glenn Martin. Glenn Martin was one of the key founders in aviation that goes back even further. He built his first airplane in 1908, opened his first factory in 1911. So he had been in business for a while. And when Bill Boeing had the interest in aviation, one of the first people he went to talk to was Glenn Martin. Glenn Martin was one of the best known flyers at the time, and Glenn Martin was also one of the best known producers of airplanes at the time. The two were just interconnected with each other, right? If you're going to build airplanes, well, you might as well fly them. If you're going to fly airplanes, you might as well build them, right? So that's what Glenn Martin was involved in. So Bill Boeing went to Glenn, and Glenn basically helped him learn how to fly. And Bill also decided, I'm going to buy one of the airplanes, Mr. Martin. Number one, because he could, because as I mentioned earlier, he didn't have any problem with resources, right? And airplanes weren't exactly cheap, but he felt he could do that. And he felt that the best way to learn as much as he could about aviation was to fly and build. So he did that. He bought that airplane from Glenn Martin. He put it together and saw the challenges of building an airplane. He saw that building an airplane was not easy. He took a look at that Martin airplane. It was a good airplane, this Model TT, but felt that, you know what, I think that there's maybe a better way that we can build airplanes. I think I'm going to try to build my own, which is exactly what he chose to do. Okay, and he got the opportunity to do that when another gentleman named Bill Westervelt approached him, and they formed a partnership to build the first airplane, hence the BMW, Boeing and Westervelt. So this is Donald Douglas. Donald Douglas is the founder of the Douglas Aircraft Company. This quote here says, although separated by miles and communities, we are one in purpose and policy, to build the largest number of the best airplanes to build the largest number possible of the best airplanes in the shortest time possible. That quote actually comes from when Douglas had already established Douglas Aircraft Company, and America was drawn into World War II. And as a result of the wartime emergency, President Roosevelt and the U.S. government passed laws and regulations to allow for the production of thousands and thousands and thousands of airplanes, which had never been done before. And Donald Douglas was tapped to be the head of the aviation concern for the United States. What does that mean? So it was recognized that in order to produce an amount of airplanes that didn't seem humanly possible, a lot of naysayers, Douglas felt that everybody involved in the aviation enterprise in the United States had to work together. They had to join hands in a way that had never been done before. Of course, back then there were a lot more aviation manufacturers, airframe manufacturers than there are today. But all these people signed their agreements that we're going to share production facilities, we're going to share design data, we're going to share intellectual property as necessary for the good of the war effort. So Donald Douglas became kind of the head industrialist for this group. This allowed, okay, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you are aware that Douglas built Boeing airplanes, right? Ford built Douglas airplanes, etc. How did that happen? Because of this agreement. Okay, the ability to have the right tooling, the right knowledge was freely shared. That would continue throughout the entire war. And we built thousands and thousands of airplanes as a result. It was the key to winning the war. As soon as that war ended, okay, as soon as that war ended, that was all over. Okay, it was all over. And Douglas immediately said, okay, that's it. No more sharing. Everybody's all on their own again. Back into the normal competitive atmosphere that we're all well aware of and all have thrived in since. So here's our friend Glenn Martin again. So early in Donald Douglas's career, before he even started the Douglas Company, he got a job working for Glenn Martin. Okay, and Glenn Martin hired him to be the chief engineer of his company after he moved his facility from Southern California to Cleveland, Ohio. The Glenn L. Martin Company was originally established in Southern California. There was a joint venture with the Wright Company. Didn't last very long, maybe about a year or less. And when that collapsed, that's when he chose to move to Cleveland and start a new Glenn L. Martin Company, which is the Glenn L. Martin Company that we're all familiar with. So Donald Douglas worked for him for this period of time, from 1915 to 1920, as a chief engineer, as the chief engineer of the Glenn L. Martin Company. And so he learned a lot about aviation design, aircraft design, production at Martin. But as much as Douglas really enjoyed doing that, he had aviation in his blood ever since he was a little kid. There's a story I read in the Doug Engel's history of McDonnell Douglas called the McDonnell Douglas story, that when Donald Douglas was at the Naval Academy, right, he was a midshipman in the Naval Academy, in his spare time, he would build model airplanes, just like he did when he was a kid. And there's no proof that this happened, but it's just a story that's kind of come down through the years. That you know, he would be at his dorm room and he would flight test these model airplanes. And one day he was doing that, and here comes this admiral with his red tube, and he looks up, and here comes this model airplane. Come on, he clips his hat. So Douglas decided that, to the chagrin of his family, that he would resign his commitment to the Naval Academy and instead went to MIT to study aeronautics. Whether or not that admiral had anything to do with that decision, we don't know. But he definitely didn't see himself spending a career in the Navy, okay, on ships. He definitely wanted to go with aviation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is Dutch Kindleberger. Dutch was the first president and chief executive officer of North American Aviation. His quote here says, "Nobody can say where such knowledge can lead us, but the record of the past is filled with demonstrations that pure physical research paid for itself many times over, often in totally unforeseen ways." North American Aviation, at the time that Dutch came to the company, had already been established, okay, but not in the form that it was when he came here. And what I mean by that is, before North American became an independent, I'll call it independent aviation company, it was called General Aviation, which is really kind of a holding company. And in the 1920s and into the early 1930s, there were several of these holding companies. Boeing was also a holding company. What do I mean by holding company? So airlines, parts manufacturers, airframe manufacturers were all owned by these holding companies. So Boeing had the manufacturing facility, okay, in Seattle, but also had United Airlines. Okay. The General Aviation Company was very similar. It had a very new but growing manufacturing and airframe company, but also had Eastern Airlines. It was all about mainly airmail. It was kind of the main source of revenue at that particular time. Although there was some passenger service, but that was relatively small. But there was this kind of growing sense that having both the manufacturers of airplanes and having the customers of airplanes all owned by basically the same company was starting to raise some eyebrows. And as a result, Congress got involved. There were hearings about this whole thing. And in the end, the Airmail Act of 1934 was passed that basically broke up these holding companies. So as a result, the aviation piece of that General Aviation holding company was spun off to become its own independent new company, North American Aviation. And Dutch Kindleberger was hired to become the head of that new concern. Boeing was also broken up. United Airlines was separated to be its own separate organization. Boeing would remain as the manufacturer, and Bill Boeing himself was so unhappy with what had happened that he chose to move on to other things. And he left the Boeing company at that particular point. And stayed associated with the Boeing company, but was no longer involved in day-to-day operations. Recognize that guy? Same guy. Glenn L. Martin. So back when Dutch got his start, where did he go to work? You want to guess? Martin. Okay. What was his role? He was the chief draftsman at Martin. And if you notice the time, he was there about the same time as Donald Douglas. So there was a little bit of overlap between these two gentlemen. And while Donald Douglas was at Martin, Dutch Kindleberger was the chief draftsman and also the assistant chief engineer. So Mr. Kindleberger and Mr. Douglas got to know each other quite well. Everybody recognize this guy? So in St. Louis, we have a warm heart for Mr. Mack, founder of McDonnell Aircraft in 1939. The quote is basically in the original papers of when the company was founded. The company intends to engage in the business of designing, developing, manufacturing, testing, selling, and repair of aircraft and parts thereof. I would have to say, with the legacy that he's left us, he did very, very well. Very, very well. Mr. Mack had a very strong love of aviation, much like the other founders. But Mr. Mack also had a very strong sense of, I'll call, operational execution. He wanted to make sure that his company would be able to withstand whatever was necessary to ensure that the customers that he was building aircraft for, as well as the people that worked for him, were taken very well care of. That's one of his main objectives. One of the considering factors of setting up shop here in St. Louis from a strategic perspective was that at the time, in 1939, this is time before there were satellites, intercontinental ballistic missiles, was that the Midwest was a place that was far away from the coasts and relatively safe from invasion. So if you want to build a military aircraft plant, the Midwest is a good location to go ahead and do that. His brother, Willie McDonnell, was a well-established banker here in the St. Louis region. He was very instrumental in terms of providing the resources at the beginning for the founding of this particular company. So guess what? Here's the same guy again, Glenn L. Martin, with our other three founders, and also our friend, Mr. Mack. So James S. McDonnell also served as the chief engineer, okay, for Glenn L. Martin from 1933 to 1939. So we don't consider Glenn Martin as one of the founders of the Boeing company, okay, at least not officially, but we certainly recognize the role that he played, okay, in forming the founders that did form the Boeing company going forward. So the fact that the companies that we see that were formed, Boeing, North American Aviation, Douglas Aircraft Company, McDonnell Aircraft Company, had the successes that they had, okay, and had the design and technology that they did, and the production capacity that they did, all speak to those very, very early experiences and lessons that they took from Glenmark. So what this is basically a sort of family tree of the Boeing company, except that most family trees kind of start out with a single trunk and it grows out to many, many branches. This one starts out with many, many branches and cones down, right, to a single trunk. So this top line here is the beginning of the Boeing company. Okay. This line here is North American Aviation, right, 1934. Right. Here's Douglas Aircraft Company, right, from the early 1920s. Here's McDonnell Aircraft Company, 1939. Our four main heritage companies. This is Boeing going out into the present. And I know this is kind of fuzzy and hard to read, so I apologize about that. So that's why I'm kind of stepping you through it. This little short leg here is Stearman Aircraft, okay, from Wichita, Kansas. Right, Stearman. Okay, so that came in right before World War II. This green line here is Vertol, okay, helicopter manufacturer in Philadelphia. Right, and that remains a major site for the Boeing company today. Okay, here's North American Aviation going out, and in the late 1960s, North American Aviation and Rockwell Standard Corporation merged to form Rockwell International, which you see here. And then in 1996, Boeing purchased the aerospace and defense portion of Rockwell International. At the time, it was called Boeing North America when it was first part of the Boeing company. And now that's a major division in terms of a lot of the space satellite things that we do. Okay, here's Douglas again, right, going out to the late 60s. Here's McDonnell Aircraft Company. And in 1967, McDonnell and Douglas merged. There was it was kind of a little bit at the time, kind of an eye-opening thing. Douglas at the time was the bigger company compared to McDonnell. Douglas at the time had the longer heritage compared to McDonnell. And Douglas at the time was in much bigger financial trouble than McDonnell. Okay, so there was a point after the fantastic competition between Douglas and Boeing for the first commercial jetliner between the 707 and DC-8. There was a lot of resources poured into both those programs. Boeing just about bet the company. They basically did bet the company on the 747. On the 707, there was a lot of company funds that went into that. Douglas did a similar kind of thing. They built a brand new assembly plant for the DC-8 and the DC-9. They were hoping that they could rest on the reputation that Douglas had, which that reputation was that they were the leader in commercial aircraft at that time. In the 1930s, they built their first successful commercial airliner, the DC-1. Right, and that was followed by a whole family of commercial aircraft, all the way down to the DC-10. Back in the 1960s, let me back up, back in the 1950s, Douglas basically ruled the skies. They had still had some DC-3s, right, which was basically the final production version of the DC-1, the DC-2. but there are a lot of DC-4s, DC-6s, and DC-7s, all four-engine propeller airliners that all the airlines of the world were using. The hope was we could keep this thing going. Get into jets, we can keep this thing going. But jets was a new technology. And a new technology can kind of introduce a sense of risk and in some senses fear in people. Will the commercial paying public be willing to ride on a jet airliner? I don't know. There are a lot of military stuff that uses jets. But I don't know about me flying on one. There was some of the attitude. So some people felt that maybe it's safer to not dive into jets so quickly. So Douglas kind of waited a little bit. Boeing chose not to do that. Boeing decided we're going to go full bore into jets. We're rolling the dice. We don't know for sure. Lockheed decided to play it a little safe. We're going to go into turboprops, right? A little bit of the past, a little bit of the future. Turboprop, right? It's a propeller driven by a jet engine. So they developed the Lockheed Electra. Well, Boeing had the right bet. They were over a year ahead of Douglas. And Douglas did well with the DC-8, but not as well as Boeing. They didn't have the same production numbers as Boeing. So as a result, all of the research and development work that was done, the non-recurring design that was done, building a brand new assembly plant for some larger production numbers, they were in financial trouble. So they announced that they were looking for a merger partner. Several companies volunteered. Okay, they submitted their bids. Interesting enough, North American Aviation was one of those. But McDonnell Aircraft was the only bidder that had the resources to pay what they were looking for in cash. No debt. They wanted it. There's a famous picture, again, in that same book I mentioned earlier, the McDonnell Douglas story of Mr. McDonnell handing the check of, I can't remember what the amount is, tens of millions of dollars at the time, to Mr. Douglas. They're both shaking hands. Both have big smiles on their faces, but I think McDonald's was a bigger smile. Okay, if we go down further here, I'll talk about all this. What are these last three lines down here? We didn't really talk about this. This is Hughes aircraft. So Howard Hughes, okay, some of you may be familiar with that name, was another icon of business in the early to mid 20th century. Richest man in America for quite a long time. Owned TWA for a time. Well, he also started an aircraft company. The famous Bruce propeller cargo aircraft that had its origins during World War II. Flew only a short distance right off the coast of San Diego and never flew again. It was built by Howard Hughes. Flown by Howard Hughes. So he started his own aircraft company. Okay, and in 1984, let me back up. So he started his own aircraft company, and then he started making helicopters here in the 1950s. And in 1984, McDonnell Douglas bought Hughes helicopters, which was all they were making at that point, from an aircraft perspective. Another division of Hughes was Hughes Electronics. And that's got a very kind of long story behind it. But in essence, in 2000 or 2001, Boeing bought Hughes Electronics. And Hughes Electronics, at that point in time, was making satellites. So a lot of our satellite R&D, design, and manufacturing has that particular heritage. Okay, so out of all these, it's all now the Boeing company going forward. And we're very, as I mentioned earlier, why is history important? Because we are obviously what all these founders and the people that work for them and those companies, we have inherited all that fantastic knowledge, okay, and all the wonderful lessons of how to build airplanes, how to repair airplanes, okay, how to support aircraft with the customer. Okay. Okay, I'm going to shift gears here a little.